Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her protective eyewear and lined up her shot. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the outdoor shooting range in Coronado, California, but she had grown accustomed to the heat during her 3 years. Working as a civilian marksmanship instructor for the Navy, the familiar weight of her service rifle felt comfortable in her hands as she prepared to demonstrate proper shooting stance to a group of new recruits. At 28, Sarah had found her calling in an unexpected place. After graduating with a degree in sports psychology, she never imagined she would end up teaching military personnel how to improve their accuracy. But life had a way of surprising her. Her father, a retired Marine, had introduced her to competitive shooting when she was just 12 years old. What started as weekend bonding time had evolved into a passion that eventually led her to win several civilian marksmanship competitions. The morning had started like any other Wednesday. Sarah arrived at the range at dawn, setting up targets and preparing equipment for the day's training sessions. The first group consisted of young sailors fresh out of boot camp, eager but nervous about their upcoming marksmanship qualifications. She had seen thousands of them over the years, each one carrying the same mixture of determination and anxiety. As she positioned herself at the 300-yard line, Sarah noticed a different energy on the range today. There was an unusual buzz among the staff, whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Her supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, had mentioned something about special operations personnel conducting training exercises, but Sarah was focused on her own responsibilities. The recruits gathered around her as she began her demonstration. Her voice carried clearly across the range as she explained the fundamentals of marksmanship. Breathing control, sight alignment, trigger squeeze, and follow-through. These were the pillars that separated good shooters from great ones. Sarah had refined her teaching method over years of experience, understanding that each student learned differently. She fired her first shot, the sharp crack echoing across the desert landscape. The bullet found its mark dead center, exactly where she had intended. The recruits murmured appreciatively, but Sarah remained focused. One good shot meant nothing if you couldn't repeat it consistently. She fired 4 more rounds in quick succession, each one clustering tightly around the first. What the recruits didn't know was that Sarah was dealing with personal challenges that would have broken many people's concentration. Her mother had been diagnosed with cancer 6 months earlier, and the treatments were draining both emotionally and financially. Sarah had been working extra shifts, taking on private coaching sessions, and even competing in weekend tournaments to help cover medical expenses. Despite these pressures, the range had become her sanctuary. Here, surrounded by the controlled chaos of military training, she could focus entirely on the precise science of putting bullets exactly where they needed to go. Every shot was a meditation, every group a small victory against the uncertainty that plagued other areas of her life. As she reloaded for another demonstration, Sarah noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A group of men had arrived at the far end of the range, but these weren't ordinary trainees. They moved with a fluid confidence that spoke of countless hours of training. Their equipment was different too, more advanced than what the regular Navy personnel used. Even from a distance, she could tell these men were special operations. The morning progressed normally despite the additional presence on the range. Sarah worked with her recruits, correcting stance issues, adjusting grip problems, and helping them understand the mental aspects of accurate shooting. She had always believed that marksmanship was 10% physical technique and 90% mental discipline. The ability to control your breathing, calm your mind, and execute the same motion repeatedly under pressure was what separated military marksmen from recreational shooters. During a brief break between training sessions, Sarah found herself observing the Special Operations team. They were conducting advanced drills, scenarios that required them to engage multiple targets from various positions and distances. Their precision was impressive, but what struck her most was their systematic approach to problem solving. When one team member struggled with a particular scenario, the others gathered around to analyze and correct the issue. Chief Rodriguez approached her during the lunch break, his expression more serious than usual. He explained that the SEAL team had requested permission to use the long-range section of the facility for the remainder of the week. Sarah nodded, understanding that her afternoon sessions would need to be relocated to the shorter distance lanes. It was a minor inconvenience, but she respected the priority given to special operations training. What Sarah didn't know was that her morning demonstration had not gone unnoticed. Several members of the SEAL team had observed her shooting while waiting for their own range time. Her consistent accuracy and professional instruction style had caught their attention. In the world of military marksmanship, reputation traveled quickly, and Sarah's name was already known in certain circles. As the day wound down, Sarah began cleaning her equipment and securing the range for the night. The SEAL team was still conducting training, their voices carrying across the desert air as they worked through complex scenarios. She had always been curious about special operations training methods but maintained appropriate professional distance. Her role was to train regular Navy personnel, not to interfere with classified exercises. The setting sun painted the desert landscape in brilliant oranges and purples, creating long shadows across the range. Sarah packed her gear methodically, the same ritual she performed every evening. Tomorrow would bring another group of recruits, another day of teaching the fundamentals that could mean the difference between life and death in combat situations. As she prepared to leave, Sarah allowed herself a moment to appreciate the quiet beauty of the desert evening. The range that had become her second home stretched out before her, marked by countless hours of training and dedication. She had no idea that tomorrow would bring an encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her own abilities, and open doors she never knew existed. The drive home took her through the small town where she had grown up, past familiar landmarks that held memories of simpler times. Tonight, like every night, she would call her mother to check on her condition and offer whatever emotional support she could provide from hundreds of miles away. Then she would review her lesson plans for tomorrow's sessions, always striving to improve her teaching methods. Sarah Martinez went to sleep that night thinking it had been just another ordinary day at the range. She had no way of knowing that her demonstration of skill and professionalism had set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. The next morning arrived with an unusual chill in the desert air, suggesting the first hints of the approaching winter season. Sarah arrived at the range 30 minutes early, as was her habit, to prepare for what she expected to be another routine day of training. However, as she unlocked the equipment shed, she noticed the SEAL team had already begun their morning preparations at the far end of the facility. Chief Rodriguez met her near the main firing line, holding a steaming cup of coffee and wearing an expression that Sarah had learned to recognize over their years of working together. It was the look he got when something unexpected was about to happen, something that would require flexibility and quick thinking. "Martinez," he began, setting down his coffee on a nearby table. "We've got a situation developing that I want you to be aware of. The SEAL team leader requested a meeting with you before their training session begins today." Sarah felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with apprehension. In her 3 years at the facility, she had never been directly requested by special operations personnel. Her interactions with such teams had always been limited to professional courtesy and staying out of their way during advanced training exercises. "Did he mention what this was about, Chief?" she asked, checking her equipment bag to ensure everything was properly organized. Rodriguez shook his head, but his expression suggested he had his suspicions. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell didn't provide details, but I suspect it has something to do with your demonstration yesterday. Word travels fast in the special operations community, and your reputation for precision shooting has been noticed." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself walking toward the SEAL team's staging area, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path. The morning sun was still low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. As she approached, she could see the team members methodically checking their equipment with the practiced efficiency that marked all elite military units. Lieutenant Commander Jack Mitchell stepped forward to greet her. He was a man in his early 40s with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent years in challenging environments. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under pressure. "Ms. Martinez," he began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came naturally to experienced military leaders. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us this morning. I understand you have your own training schedule to maintain." Sarah nodded respectfully, curious about where this conversation was heading. She had heard stories about SEAL team operations, but had never expected to have a direct conversation with one of their commanders. Mitchell gestured toward a table where several rifles were laid out in precise order. My team and I observed your demonstration yesterday afternoon. Your consistency and technique were impressive, particularly at the longer ranges. We're currently working on some advanced marksmanship scenarios, and I wanted to discuss the possibility of getting your perspective on a particular challenge we're facing. He led her to where the team had set up targets at various distances, some as far as 800 yards. The complexity of the shooting scenario was immediately apparent. Multiple targets were positioned at different elevations and angles, designed to simulate real-world combat situations where standard range training would be insufficient. We're preparing for a mission that will require precision shooting under extremely challenging conditions, Mitchell explained, pointing toward the distant targets. Environmental factors, time constraints, and equipment limitations will all play a role. Yesterday, watching your fundamentals instruction, I realized we might benefit from a civilian marksmanship perspective. Sarah studied the target layout with growing interest. Her competitive shooting background had exposed her to various challenging scenarios, but nothing quite like what the SEAL team had constructed. The distances were extreme, the target sizes varied significantly, and the positioning required shooters to engage from multiple angles and elevations. What specific challenges are you encountering? She asked, her professional curiosity overriding any nervousness about working with elite military personnel. One of the team members, a tall man with intense green eyes, stepped forward. We're struggling with consistency at the longer ranges when transitioning between targets rapidly. Individual shots are accurate, but maintaining precision during quick engagement sequences is proving difficult. Sarah nodded, understanding the problem immediately. It was a common issue she had encountered with competitive shooters who tried to increase their speed without maintaining proper fundamentals. The solution required a combination of mental discipline and refined technique. The key is establishing a rhythm that allows for proper sight picture between targets, she explained, moving closer to examine their shooting positions. Most shooters try to rush the transition and end up compromising their accuracy. There are specific breathing techniques and sight alignment methods that can help maintain precision while increasing engagement speed, Mitchell listened carefully as Sarah outlined her approach to rapid target engagement. Her explanation demonstrated not only technical knowledge, but also a deep understanding of the mental aspects of precision shooting under pressure. These were exactly the insights his team needed. Would you be willing to work with us for a few hours? Mitchell asked. I realize this is outside your normal duties, but Chief Rodriguez has assured me that your morning schedule can be adjusted if necessary. Sarah felt a surge of excitement at the opportunity to work with such an elite team. The challenge they presented was unlike anything she had encountered in civilian competition, and the chance to contribute to their mission preparation was both humbling and thrilling. I would be honored to help, she replied, already mentally cataloging the techniques and training methods that might be applicable to their situation. What Sarah didn't know was that this request represented more than just a consultation. Mitchell had spent considerable time the previous evening researching her background, reviewing competition records, and speaking with contacts in the civilian marksmanship community. The consensus was unanimous. Sarah Martinez was not just a skilled instructor but a genuinely exceptional marksman whose abilities rivaled those of military snipers. The SEAL team had been preparing for a mission that would require unprecedented precision under extreme conditions. Standard military training had brought them to a certain level of proficiency, but they needed something more. Mitchell had recognized that Sarah's unique combination of competitive experience, teaching ability, and mental discipline might provide the edge his team needed. As they began setting up for the training session, Sarah noticed the atmosphere among the team members was different from what she had expected. Rather than the rigid hierarchy she associated with military units, there was a collaborative spirit that reminded her of her competitive shooting teams. These men respected expertise regardless of its source and were genuinely interested in improving their capabilities. The morning sun climbed higher as Sarah began demonstrating the techniques she had developed over years of competition. She showed them breathing patterns that maintained oxygen flow during rapid target transitions, sight alignment methods that reduced the time between shots, and mental visualization techniques that helped maintain focus under pressure. What impressed her most was how quickly the team adapted to her suggestions. These were men accustomed to learning rapidly and applying new knowledge under pressure. Within an hour, she could see measurable improvement in their consistency and speed. However, as the morning progressed, Sarah began to sense that this training session was leading to something more significant. The questions Mitchell asked went beyond basic marksmanship instruction, touching on topics like equipment selection, environmental adaptation, and performance under extreme stress. She realized that this was not just a consultation, but an extended evaluation. As they broke for lunch, Mitchell approached her with an expression that suggested the conversation was about to take a serious turn. The morning had gone better than he had hoped, confirming his assessment of Sarah's abilities and teaching skills. Now it was time to present the opportunity that had been developing since the previous day. The desert sun reached its peak intensity as Sarah prepared to hear a proposition that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her future and her capabilities as a marksman. The lunch break provided little respite from the intensity that had been building throughout the morning. Sarah sat in the shade of the equipment building, reviewing the morning session while the SEAL team huddled in their own discussion nearby. She could sense their conversation was about more than just marksmanship techniques, but she couldn't quite make out the specifics of what they were discussing. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached her as she finished her sandwich, his expression more serious than it had been during the morning training. He carried himself with the purposeful stride of someone who had made an important decision and was ready to act on it. "Sarah," he began, using her first name for the first time, "I need to have a frank conversation with you about something that goes beyond today's training session." She set down her water bottle and gave him her full attention, sensing that whatever he was about to propose would be significant. Mitchell glanced back at his team, then focused on her with an intensity that made it clear this was not a casual request. "The mission we're preparing for requires a level of precision that pushes the boundaries of what's normally expected in military operations. We need someone who can make shots that most people would consider impossible, under conditions that would break the concentration of even experienced snipers." Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken as she began to understand the direction this conversation was taking. The morning's training had been more than just instruction. It had been an audition for something much larger. "We've been authorized to recruit civilian specialists for this particular operation," Mitchell continued. "Your background, skills, and performance this morning have convinced me that you might be exactly what we need. But before I can make any formal recommendations, I need to see you perform under conditions that more closely simulate what we'll be facing." He gestured toward the far end of the range, where Sarah could see his team had been setting up equipment during their lunch break. What she saw made her realize that the morning session had been elementary compared to what they were now preparing. "What kind of conditions are we talking about?" she asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would push her far beyond anything she had experienced in civilian competition. One of the team members, the tall man with green eyes who had introduced himself as Petty Officer Martinez, approached carrying a rifle case. Inside was a weapon unlike anything Sarah had worked with before. The precision rifle was equipped with advanced optics and modifications that spoke of serious long-range capability. "We need to see you engage targets at distances up to 200 yards, Mitchell explained, "under time pressure, with environmental factors that will test your ability to adapt quickly. Wind conditions, moving targets, and multiple engagement scenarios that require split-second decision-making." Sarah examined the rifle carefully, noting its weight, balance, and the sophistication of its scope system. Everything about the weapon indicated it was designed for extreme precision shooting, the kind used by military snipers in the most demanding situations. "The mission parameters require shots that must be made under extreme stress, with no opportunity for second chances," Martinez added. "We need to know that whoever we recommend can handle that level of pressure without compromising accuracy." As they walked toward the extended range setup, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The opportunity to test herself against such challenging scenarios was thrilling, but she also understood that her performance in the next few hours might determine whether she would be offered a chance to participate in something far beyond her current experience. The target array they had constructed was intimidating even by military standards. Targets were positioned at distances ranging from 600 to 200 yards, some stationary, others designed to move unpredictably. Environmental challenges had been introduced as well, including smoke generators that would obscure vision and fans that created variable wind conditions. The scenario is based on real mission parameters, Mitchell explained as Sarah familiarized herself with the rifle. You'll have limited time to assess each target, calculate environmental factors, and make the shot. Miss rates that would be acceptable in competition or training are not acceptable for this mission. Sarah spent 20 minutes getting comfortable with the weapon, understanding its characteristics and learning to work with the advanced optics system. The rifle was heavier than what she was accustomed to, but the additional weight provided stability that would be crucial for long-range accuracy. The first target appeared at 800 yards, partially obscured by artificial smoke. Sarah had 30 seconds to locate it, assess wind conditions, and engage. She controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and waited for the crosshairs to settle. The shot broke cleanly and the target indicator showed a center hit. Time 22 seconds, Martinez called out. Wind correction was perfect. The scenarios became progressively more challenging. Moving targets required her to lead properly while maintaining precision. Variable wind conditions forced her to read environmental clues and adjust accordingly. Time pressures tested her ability to make accurate assessments quickly without rushing her shot execution. What impressed the SEAL team most was not just Sarah's accuracy, but her consistency under pressure. As the scenarios became more difficult, her performance remained steady. She adapted to each new challenge methodically, applying the same fundamental principles she had been teaching for years. The final scenario was designed to push her to her absolute limits: multiple targets at extreme range, obscured vision, variable wind, and a time constraint that would challenge even experienced military snipers. Sarah had 90 seconds to engage 3 targets at distances between 1,000 and 1,200 yards, with penalty points for any shots outside the critical scoring zones. As she settled into position for the final test, Sarah felt a calm focus that she recognized from her most successful competitions. The external pressures faded away, leaving only the essential elements: sight picture, breathing, trigger control, and follow-through. Everything else became background noise. The first target appeared at 1,050 yards, barely visible through the artificial haze. Sarah located it quickly, assessed the wind flags positioned along the range, and made her adjustments. The shot felt perfect as it broke, and the target confirmed a center hit. Time elapsed: 28 seconds. The second target materialized at 1,200 yards, the maximum distance she had ever attempted under pressure. The target was smaller than those used in civilian competition, and the wind conditions had shifted since her first shot. Sarah took an extra moment to read the environmental conditions, then settled her crosshairs and fired. Another center hit. Total time, 55 seconds. The final target was the most challenging of all. At 100 yards, it was partially concealed and would only be visible for 15 seconds. Sarah had 35 seconds remaining when it appeared. She located it immediately, but the wind had shifted again, requiring a different correction than her previous shots. With 20 seconds remaining, Sarah made her final adjustment and began her breathing sequence. The crosshairs settled as she exhaled, and she pressed the trigger steadily through its travel. The shot broke at exactly the moment she had intended, and the distant target confirmed her third consecutive center hit. Total time, 87 seconds. 3 shots, 3 hits, all within the critical scoring zones at distances that would challenge any marksman in the world. The silence that followed was broken by Martinez's quiet whistle of appreciation. "I've never seen anything like that," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. Mitchell approached Sarah as she cleared the rifle and engaged its safety. His expression was one of satisfaction mixed with something that looked like relief. "Sarah," he said, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation about your future." As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sarah realized that her life had just taken a turn that she could never have anticipated. The test she had just completed was not the end of an evaluation, but the beginning of an opportunity that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her capabilities. The SEAL team began packing their equipment with the satisfied efficiency of men who had found exactly what they were looking for. Whatever mission they were preparing for, Sarah had just proven that she possessed the skills they needed. Now the question was whether she was ready to step into a world where those skills would be tested under conditions far more demanding than any training range could simulate. The secure briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Located deep within a nondescript building on the base, the windowless room contained sophisticated communication equipment and walls lined with maps marked with locations she couldn't identify. As she sat across from Lieutenant Commander Mitchell and two other officers she hadn't met before, Sarah realized she was about to learn details that would forever change her understanding of her own capabilities and responsibilities. 3 days had passed since her performance on the range, 3 days during which Sarah had barely slept as she tried to process what had happened and what might come next. Chief Rodriguez had been surprisingly supportive when Mitchell requested her temporary reassignment for special consultation, though Sarah suspected he knew more about the situation than he was revealing. The two additional officers introduced themselves as Captain Rebecca Thompson from Naval Intelligence and Major David Chen from Joint Special Operations Command. Their presence indicated that whatever mission was being discussed operated at levels far above routine military operations. "What I'm about to share with you," Captain Thompson began, "is classified at the highest levels. Your security clearance has been expedited based on urgent operational requirements. But I need to emphasize that everything discussed in this room falls under strict confidentiality agreements." Sarah nodded, understanding that she was crossing a threshold from which there might be no return to her previous civilian role. The weight of that realization was both exciting and terrifying. Major Chen opened a folder containing satellite photographs and tactical maps. 6 weeks ago, intelligence assets identified a compound in a remote mountainous region where a high-value target has been conducting operations that pose an immediate threat to American interests. The target has surrounded himself with security measures that make traditional assault approaches extremely difficult. The photographs showed a fortress-like structure built into the side of a mountain, with clear sight lines in all directions and defensive positions that would make any direct approach nearly impossible. Sarah could see why conventional military tactics would be inadequate for this situation. "The target must be neutralized," Mitchell continued, "but the operational constraints require a precision approach that minimizes collateral damage and reduces the risk to our personnel. We need someone who can make a shot at extreme range under field conditions with absolute certainty of success." Captain Thompson pointed to specific locations on the tactical map. "The mission parameters require engagement at a distance of approximately 1,400 yards, from a concealed position that will provide only a brief window of opportunity. Environmental factors include altitude effects, variable wind conditions, and the possibility of limited visibility." Sarah studied the materials carefully, understanding that they were describing a scenario that would push the boundaries of what was technically possible. In precision shooting, the distance alone was at the extreme end of what even the most skilled snipers could accomplish consistently, and the environmental factors would make success highly uncertain. "Why me?" she asked, voicing the question that had been haunting her since the range demonstration. "Surely you have military snipers with more experience in these conditions." Mitchell leaned forward, his expression serious but not without warmth. "We do have excellent snipers, Sarah, but this mission requires something beyond traditional military training. Your competitive background has given you experience with precision shooting under pressure that most military marksmen never develop. More importantly, your teaching background means you understand the mental aspects of extreme accuracy in ways that could make the difference between success and failure." Major Chen added, "Our psychological evaluation indicates that your civilian background might actually be an advantage in this situation. Military snipers are trained for combat scenarios, but this mission requires the kind of precision shooting that's more common in civilian competition. You've spent years making shots that have to be perfect the first time, under pressure, with no opportunity for adjustment." Sarah felt the full weight of what they were asking beginning to settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about marksmanship. They were asking her to participate in an operation where lives would depend on her ability to perform under conditions she had never faced. "What would my role be exactly?" she asked, needing to understand the complete scope of what was being proposed. "You would be integrated into the team as a specialist consultant," Captain Thompson explained. "The mission would require approximately 2 weeks of intensive preparation, including advanced training in field conditions, equipment familiarization, and scenario rehearsal. You would deploy with the team to a forward staging area and participate in the operation as the primary marksman. The room fell silent as Sarah processed the magnitude of what was being offered. This opportunity would take her far beyond anything she had ever imagined, testing her skills under real-world conditions where failure could have catastrophic consequences. "I need to be completely honest with you," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had made similar decisions many times before. "This mission carries significant personal risk. While we'll do everything possible to ensure your safety, operating in hostile territory always involves dangers that can't be completely eliminated." Sarah thought about her mother, still fighting her battle with cancer, depending on the income from Sarah's job for medical treatments. She thought about her comfortable routine at the range, the predictable challenges of teaching marksmanship to young sailors. Everything in her current life was stable, secure, and well within her control. But she also thought about the feeling she had experienced during the range test, the pure satisfaction of pushing her abilities to their absolute limits and discovering she was capable of more than she had ever realized. The opportunity to contribute to something larger than herself, to use her skills in service of her country, was appealing in ways she was still trying to understand. "What happens to my current position?" she asked, thinking practically about the implications of accepting this assignment. "Your job will be held for you," Chief Rodriguez said, entering the briefing room for the first time. Sarah realized he had been waiting outside, probably for hours while the classified discussion took place. "The Navy has agreed to maintain your civilian contract and provide additional compensation for this special assignment. Your mother's medical benefits will continue without interruption." The fact that they had already considered her personal circumstances told Sarah that this request had been planned carefully and at high levels. They weren't making this offer impulsively. Significant resources had been invested in bringing her to this moment. Captain Thompson handed her a tablet containing additional mission details that she was authorized to review. "You have 24 hours to make your decision. I know this is a lot to process, and we're asking you to step far outside your normal experience. But I want you to know that everyone in this room believes you have the skills and mental strength to succeed." As Sarah left the briefing room, her mind was spinning with the weight of the decision before her. The secure corridors of the naval facility felt surreal after the intensity of the classified discussion. Everything about her situation had changed in the span of a few hours. Yet the world around her continued normally. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone and thinking about calling her mother. But how could she explain what she was considering without revealing classified information? How could she describe the opportunity she was being offered, when she herself was still trying to understand its full implications? She walked to her trophy case, looking at the awards she had earned over years of competitive shooting. Each one represented countless hours of practice, dedication, and the pursuit of precision under pressure. Now she was being asked to apply those same skills in a context where the stakes were higher than any competition she had ever entered. The decision she made in the next 24 hours would determine whether she remained a civilian marksmanship instructor or became something she had never imagined possible. A precision specialist operating at the highest levels of military operations. Either choice would change her life forever, but only one would allow her to discover the true limits of her capabilities. As night fell over Coronado, Sarah Martinez faced the most important decision of her life, knowing that whatever she chose would define not only her future, but also her understanding of who she really was and what she was capable of becoming. The helicopter's rotors beat steadily against the thin mountain air as Sarah checked her equipment one final time. 2 weeks of intensive training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could fully simulate the reality of being deployed in hostile territory with a mission that could alter the course of international events. Below them, the rugged landscape of the target region stretched endlessly, a maze of peaks and valleys that had hidden conflicts for centuries. Her decision to accept the mission had surprised even herself. After a sleepless night weighing the risks against the opportunity to serve her country in a way she had never imagined possible, Sarah had called Lieutenant Commander Mitchell with her answer. The 2 weeks that followed had been the most challenging of her life. As the SEAL team put her through training that tested not only her marksmanship skills but her ability to operate under the extreme conditions they would face, the training had taken place at a remote facility in the Nevada mountains, where Sarah learned to shoot from concealed positions calculate bullet trajectories at high altitude, and maintain accuracy despite fatigue, stress, and environmental challenges that civilian competition had never prepared her for. Most importantly, she had learned to work as part of a team where every member's life depended on the other's competence and reliability. Now, as the helicopter approached the drop zone, Sarah felt a calm focus that reminded her of the moments before important competitions, but magnified by the knowledge that this shot would have consequences far beyond any trophy or medal. The target was a terrorist leader, whose network had been responsible for attacks that had killed hundreds of innocent people, and intelligence indicated he was planning something even more devastating. The helicopter settled into a rocky clearing surrounded by peaks that rose another 1,000 feet above them. The team moved with practiced efficiency, unloading equipment and establishing their temporary base camp in a location that provided concealment while offering the sight lines they would need for the mission. Sarah carried her rifle case and shooting equipment, gear that had been customized specifically for the challenges they would face. The target compound was visible through high-powered optics. Nestled into the mountainside approximately 400 yards from their position, the intelligence reports had been accurate. The location was heavily fortified and positioned to make traditional assault approaches nearly impossible. Their mission was to eliminate the target during a brief window when he would be exposed, based on intercepted communications about a scheduled meeting. As Sarah set up her shooting position, she reflected on how far she had traveled from the civilian marksmanship instructor who had been demonstrating basic techniques just 3 weeks earlier. The rifle she now carried was equipped with the most advanced optics available, calibrated specifically for the atmospheric conditions they would encounter. Every detail of her equipment had been selected to maximize the probability of success in this single critical shot. The team established a defensive perimeter while Sarah and her spotter, Petty Officer Martinez, prepared the shooting position. The location provided excellent concealment and a clear line of sight to the target area. But the extreme range and environmental factors would make this one of the most challenging shots ever attempted outside of controlled conditions. Wind is variable between 5 and 12 miles per hour, Martinez reported, reading the environmental conditions through his spotting scope. Temperature is dropping as the sun sets, which will affect bullet trajectory. We need to be ready to adjust quickly when the target appears. Sarah settled into her position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle and the steady rhythm of controlled breathing that had become second nature over years of competition. But this was different from any competition she had ever entered. The target was not a piece of paper or a metal plate, but a human being whose actions threatened innocent lives. The waiting was the hardest part. Intelligence indicated the target would appear at a specific window during the scheduled meeting, but the exact timing was uncertain. Sarah had to maintain perfect shooting position, while remaining alert for the brief opportunity that might last only seconds. As the sun began to set behind the western peaks, casting long shadows across the mountainous terrain, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she had been a civilian instructor focused on teaching basic marksmanship to young sailors. Now she was part of a special operations mission that required skills she had never known she possessed. The radio crackled with confirmation that the target was moving toward the meeting location. Sarah made final adjustments to her scope, accounting for the changing light conditions and the slight shift in wind direction that Martinez had detected. Everything they had trained for was about to be tested under the most demanding conditions possible. "Target approaching the window," Martinez whispered, his voice steady despite the tension of the moment. Range confirmed at 420 yards. Wind holding steady at 8 miles per hour from the northwest. Sarah controlled her breathing and found her natural point of aim, the crosshairs settling on the window where the target would appear. Years of competition had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but this pressure was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The weight of responsibility was enormous, yet she felt the same focused clarity that had carried her through countless competitions. "Visual confirmation," Martinez reported quietly. "Target is at the window, presenting a clear shot profile." Through her scope, Sarah could see the figure clearly despite the extreme distance. The target was exactly where intelligence had predicted, standing at the window during what appeared to be an important conversation with associates inside the compound. This was the moment they had prepared for, the brief opportunity that might not come again. Sarah made her final adjustments, accounting for the bullet drop at extreme range and the wind correction Martinez had calculated. At 1,420 yards, the bullet would take nearly 2 seconds to reach the target, requiring precise calculation of environmental factors that could affect its trajectory. Everything had to be perfect. The crosshairs settled naturally as Sarah reached the natural respiratory pause in her breathing cycle. The trigger broke cleanly, exactly as she had practiced thousands of times in competition and training. The rifle recoiled smoothly, and Sarah maintained her sight picture through the follow-through, just as her father had taught her years ago. "Hit confirmed," Martinez said after what seemed like an eternity, but was actually less than 3 seconds. "Target is down. Mission successful." The radio crackled with confirmation from the team leader that secondary objectives had been achieved and extraction procedures were beginning. Sarah safed her rifle and began the process of securing her equipment, but part of her mind was still processing what had just occurred. She had made a shot that would have been considered nearly impossible under ideal conditions, and she had done it under operational stress that tested every aspect of her training and mental preparation. The terrorist leader who had been responsible for so much death and suffering would never again threaten innocent lives. As the team prepared for extraction, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing that her skills had been used to protect others, but also a soberness about the reality of what she had just accomplished. This was not a competition where success meant winning a trophy. This was a mission where success meant ending a human life to save many others. The helicopter extraction went smoothly, the team lifting off from the mountain landing zone as darkness settled over the remote region. During the flight back to the forward operating base, Sarah stared out at the landscape below, thinking about how much her life had changed in such a short time. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached her during the flight, offering a quiet "well done" that carried more weight than any trophy she had ever received. The mission had succeeded because every team member had performed their role perfectly. But Sarah knew that her contribution had been critical to that success. Back at the base, during the mission debrief, Sarah learned more about the intelligence that had led to the operation. The target had been planning an attack that could have killed thousands of people, and the elimination of his network's leadership would significantly disrupt their capabilities. Her single shot had prevented a tragedy that would have affected families around the world. A week later, Sarah found herself back at the Coronado Range, teaching marksmanship fundamentals to a new group of Navy recruits. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. She demonstrated the same techniques, emphasized the same principles of breathing and sight alignment, and maintained the same professional demeanor that had characterized her instruction for years. But everything had changed. Sarah now understood that the skills she had developed through years of competitive shooting and refined through teaching others could serve purposes far beyond anything she had previously imagined. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she never knew existed and had proven them under the most demanding conditions possible. The recruits she now trained had no idea that their instructor had recently completed a mission at the highest levels of special operations. They saw only a competent civilian marksmanship instructor who emphasized precision and mental discipline. But Sarah carried with her the knowledge that those same fundamentals she taught every day could be applied in ways that served the highest purposes of protecting innocent lives. Her mother's medical treatments were progressing well, funded in part by the additional compensation she had received for the special assignment. Sarah had never told her the details of where that money had come from, describing it simply as a consulting project for advanced marksmanship training. 3 months after the mission, Sarah received a visit from Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, who brought news that her performance had been noted at the highest levels of military command. There would be other opportunities, he explained, situations where her unique combination of skills and civilian perspective might be needed again. Sarah listened to his words while watching her current group of recruits practice their shooting fundamentals on the range. Each of them was learning skills that might someday save their lives or the lives of others. The precision and mental discipline she taught them were more than just marksmanship techniques. They were tools that could serve the highest purposes of military service. As the sun set over the Coronado Range that evening, Sarah Martinez cleaned her equipment and secured the facility for another day. To anyone watching, she was simply a civilian marksmanship instructor completing her daily routine. But she carried with her the knowledge that she had answered her country's call when her unique skills were needed, and she had proven herself capable of performing under pressure that few people ever experience. The woman who had once been content to teach basic marksmanship to Navy recruits had discovered that her capabilities extended far beyond anything she had previously imagined. When a SEAL had passed her his rifle and stepped back, he had not just been seeking marksmanship instruction. He had been identifying someone whose skills could serve purposes that neither of them had initially understood. Sarah's story had become one of discovering that the limits we place on ourselves are often far below what we are actually capable of achieving. Sometimes it takes someone else recognizing our potential and challenging us to reach it before we understand what we can truly accomplish. The range where she had spent years teaching others had become the place where she first learned the full extent of her own extraordinary abilities.